Hey everybody, I'm really excited about today's episode. I talked with Paola Pascual, and we had a really great conversation about professional communication, mindsets and habits connected to language learning and expression, and the positive impacts of a vibrant multicultural community on work and innovation. Paola spoke to the intersection of individual identity and language expression, and how she helps non-native English speakers become more of their full selves in their non-native language through her role at Talaera. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Paola Pascual. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Paola Pascual, and we're going to be talking all things communication. We're going to be talking about maybe some fears around communication and communicating in different languages. I'm so excited to be joined today by Paola, so thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's a great show, and I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So we like to start off with how we got connected. And this has been so fun as the podcast has continued to grow and just meeting different people from all over.
So we met through an awesome community, L&D Shakers, and I co-host Talaera Talks, and we always have some great hosts. But I had really never been on the other side, and it was a way for me to I wanted to put myself out there, and so I just wrote this message, and then you wrote back, and then I checked out your podcast, and I thought this is amazing. I love the concept, I love the topic, and it just felt like a great opportunity.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that we got connected through L&D Shakers. Ana Maria got to come on a couple of weeks back, and we had such a fun conversation. And anytime anyone asks me about community, I speak about the L&D Shakers community and just the intentionality that she and now a team of growing community members. She's really empowered us within the community to make connections like this and build opportunities to continue to grow and learn from each other. And it's such a giving community, a generous community. And I just love being a part of it. So I'm so grateful for that.
It truly is. It's great.
Yeah. Have there been, just before we get into some of the other things, have there been any other, interesting connections or opportunities? How long have you been a part of the L&D Shakers?
Not long, maybe a month or two. So I haven't really had the chance, but every time I ask a question, I get a bunch of responses, great, really thoughtful answers and tips. And it truly is one of the best communities I've been part of. So I'm excited to explore more.
I love it. That has been my experience too. You're right. Like whenever I ask a question, thoughtful responses and resources. And then Ana Maria is also wonderful about, hey, that doesn't go in this thread. It goes over here in this thread. Thanks. And that really keeps it so organized and clear and lets each of those threads be their own space, at least in the Slack side of the community. And I'd love to hear, Paola, tell us a little bit about your background, what brought you to the work that you do. You can start anywhere. Tell us your story. I love to hear everyone's background about where it brought them to the work they do now.
Yeah, so I was born in Spain, and then I moved out at a young age. I lived in the US and Vietnam and Belgium. So I lived in many different places, and I worked there. And it was only 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, that I moved back to Spain. And I've also always been passionate about psychology and how people behave, how they communicate. So like bringing this all together, I noticed that communication it is simple in a way, but it also has a lot of nuances, and it can bring so many great things. Like when you have a multicultural team, then you see a lot of innovation and decision making is improved. But it can also lead to a lot of frustrations and communication breakdowns. So that kind of all brought together like what I do now, which is I build communication courses for non-native English professionals. And it's a way, I realized I studied psychology, I studied translation, and I realized that when I lived abroad, I could speak some of the languages, but that didn't mean that I could be myself. It didn't mean that I could truly like add value and make connections with people, build relationships. So that's what I really want to do, and that's what I love doing. So with Talaera, this is really what we do. It's like we help professionals who are part of this international workplace. They may know how to speak English, but then it gets to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, but I need to take it to the next level. So that's a bit the gist of what I do.
And it's so interesting to me because some of my language background that connects me to this topic personally is I was a Spanish major. So I went to a school where I had Spanish, basic Spanish from kindergarten through 12th grade, but then into college. I started at one college and was a leadership major, but then that program didn't exist when I transferred from that college to a different college. And so the most credits I had was Spanish. And so I went that route and then did a business minor. And all that to say, I had written like 25-page papers in Spanish, thinking about Spanish literature and all these different things that I had to do for my major. But it wasn't until I went and lived abroad and I actually taught in the public schools of Mexico that I became confident enough in my ability to really speak the language. And even then, that was, there were many nights of tears. Like, is anybody understanding what I'm saying? But they had to enough to have 3 classes of 45th graders, 3 classes of 46th graders in my second language. So I had to learn. And then
Wow.
but I think one of the areas I'd love to connect to is even for me now, I don't quite get to use my Spanish as much as I'd like, but when I do, there is this little bit of fear barrier to where I know I'm not conjugating all the verbs right because I haven't been practicing as much. And so what would you say around, maybe if we could dig into the fear piece of it, what do you do to help those who you work with on the psychology side of it, on the fear that stops us sometimes from reaching out and communicating in our second language or feeling confident in that?
So I feel a lot of language learners tend to be quite perfectionist. So
Oh.
they like to, and we may not be a perfectionist in our daily life, but when it comes to speaking a language, just because we do it every day in our native language and we are so used to doing it right, we expect the same in our second or third language. And and being perfect doesn't mean like speaking great with great grammar and great vocabulary doesn't mean that you're an effective communicator. You can be an effective communicator, making mistakes and not conjugating verbs the right way. So that's a bit mindset shift that really, really helps and helps you get over all those fears. Is like you don't really have to be perfect to be an awesome communicator. I think that's the first step.
Yeah. Oh, that's really meaningful to me. I'm thinking about, yeah, that I'm thinking about people who might be really strong grammatically and have no idea that people are not tracking with them emotionally or they've totally missed the boat on something else. And so it seems to me that maybe that offers some freedom to just go for it and to really focus in perhaps on what does make somebody an effective communicator. So is that an area maybe you'd like to tell us more about? What are some of those main, if you've got some of that mindset shift and you're ready to show up and go for it, what are some of the things that you work on around effective communication that people should keep in mind?
Yeah, so there's a lot of back work that you need to get, like practicing, and just getting your muscles used to, like your mouth muscles used to the sounds and the phrases, and just learning in chunks and you repeating them over and over again. That really helps. Really truly helps, like reading out loud and speaking in front of the mirror and trying to repeat after an interview that you like from an I don't know, a celebrity that you admire. That helps a lot. And then when it comes to truly speaking, I mean, there's a lot of tips. We could talk about this forever, uh, but truly understanding who the other person is,
Mm.
and understanding what do they want to hear. That's the first question that one should think about when you're trying to communicate something. How can I make this and truly make it about them? How can I make this about them? Even if what you're pitching is for yourself, you always have to think, what is something that they may want to get that I can give them and tie it back to the topic that I want to talk about.
Ooh. Ooh. Could we zoom in? Do you have an example of something like that?
Yes, we could think about many different examples. So let's say for example, there is a project that you want to get approved. So you have perhaps a presentation or you have to put together a meeting. Um, an email, like you really have to create this environment where it's not only about why you want to get that project approved, but what are the individual people involved? Like, what are the different stakeholders getting out of it? And truly thinking about, okay, this person might get, that we need to change, I don't know, an example. We want to change the software to do something, and that's something that you want to get. Is that going to save them time? Then present it that way, or will it save money to the company? Like, what are the different stakeholders' interests, and how can you truly like tie it back to it?
Oh, I love that. And so, one of the sentence stems that we like to ask is if only people knew, because one of the premises here is that there's profound insight in simplicity. And I know we could talk for hours and hours about communication and all of your deep expertise. But if somebody stopped you and said, what is it, Paula, about like if only people knew when it comes to what you've learned to this point in your life around this topic, what would you say?
This is a great question. So the one I thought about, is if people knew that asking the right questions would take them places. Like, that is such an underrated skill, and especially when you work in an international environment, um, you need to know how to ask the right questions. And if I were to give a tip on how to ask questions in the right way, that would be avoid yes no questions and ask open-ended questions. And the main reason, there's many reasons for this, but one of them is that yes and no don't mean the same around the world. um, like in the Western world, yes tends to be something about agreement, or I understand, I agree, or okay, let's do that. But then when I moved to Vietnam, I realized that in many parts of Asia, it doesn't mean I agree, or it doesn't mean let's do it. It just means I hear you.
Hmm.
I may disagree. I may not do it. It may not happen ever, but I hear you. So when you have a meeting, for example, with your team in some parts of Asia, and you ask them, okay, so will the project be done next week? I said, yes. And you're like, okay, then I take that it will be finished. But it doesn't mean that. It's just that for some cultures, that no is it's very complicated.
Hmm.
So that's most, change in how you ask questions could
Right.
really
Those are two
change
very
it.
different things. Yes, I hear you, and yes, it will be done. And I can see where, that creates some challenges, and I've had a couple guests where we've talked about communication simply in one language with only native speakers and the complication of just psychology and humans working together at work. And one of my guests, Jillian Callie, said, in the absence of communication, people form their own narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yes, it's so true. And I think about the kind of dot, dot, dot in Slack, or the dot, dot, dot in Messenger, when people are like thinking, okay, wait, should I say it like this? Should I say it like that? And just some of the complication that I think our brains and the psychology add. And as I've done some of my own personal therapy work, I have realized that in kind of rewiring my own soundtracks that are connected to perfectionism, really, I have realized how many times I am putting that narrative on a situation that isn't the reality. And when I can, what I have found is that radical candor of just asking and like, hey, I feel like there's some tension here. Am I missensing that? Or, whatever it might be, that so many times it is that narrative that we've created instead of the reality that's there. And so maybe around that idea of when there is a misunderstanding, what do you go to in your communication bag of tricks that helps people to either avoid the misunderstanding on the front end or work through it once it's there? That kind of complicated side of communication. You can go either way, whatever you prefer.
I loved what you said before about, when people don't have all the information, they complete that information, and that is so true. We cannot deal with uncertainty, and we'd much rather make something up, even if it may not be true, than just have live with that uncertainty. Uncertainty is very painful. So that's how we do. So yeah, we tend to construct and fabricate all these meanings that may not be true, may not be real. So when it comes to avoiding or working through misunderstandings, asking, again, going back to asking questions, and also being aware of the fact that what we understand is, in a way, our responsibility.
Mm.
So not putting it on the other person. So first thing, try to tackle it as soon as possible. So don't let it grow. That's the first thing. So whenever you sense that there is some sort of tension or something that you may not truly agree with, try to talk about it as soon as possible. And then really be honest about how you felt, how you understood the situation, rather than, oh, you said this and you offended me. Like, it's more like, I felt this. Is that what you meant? So
Mm.
approaching it from that perspective of, I'm not blaming you. It's just, this is how I received it. If
Mm.
that's how you meant it, then let's talk about it. And if not, then please let me know. Like,
Mm.
helping others clarify and give them that chance of almost the benefit of the doubt as well.
Right. I love one of the norms I try to apply personally and with my clients is assume positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
And we when you're working with somebody, you both want to get something done. You both have you likely have an aligned end goal and maybe different ways of getting there. And so starting with that assumption, I think helps some of those soundtracks or the narratives that are made up to stay in the positive realm. And I love the idea of what I heard in there was ownership, taking some ownership and responsibility for your own personal end. And imagine if both sides of a conversation always did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we always came to the table and as soon as one of your other points was not letting it grow, as soon as there's some sort of potential misunderstanding, we don't wait until like the status report in 3 months. We handle it then and discuss. And sometimes, actually very often, I've found when I have brought it forward, it really was the narrative that I had construed in my mind was not accurate. And then there was so much freedom in saying, oh, okay, we're moving
Mm-hmm.
forward, and we could go back to assuming positive intent and really trying to stay there. Maybe starting with your Talaera team, who is also multicultural, what have you found works really effectively? Maybe either systems or, again, mindsets in working with that team that's been really helpful.
So it's interesting. It's funny when you work with multicultural teams and then you help them communicate more effectively, and then when they ask you a question, it's like, oh, hold on, I haven't done any sort of like this introspection in a while. Um, so for us, we try to be super understanding and forgiving when it comes to communication styles. So if someone is super direct, then we understand, okay, this person comes from a more direct culture, and we just take it. So we're quite efficient in that way. But one of the systems that works really well for us is anytime there is a conversation, we send a summary afterwards. So there's a meeting, we send a summary. This is what I understood, and then it has to be in writing. So this is what I understood. This is what this person is going to do. This is what's going to happen, or this was the issue. This is how we're going to solve it. Almost like the action items, but also like with a summary. And sometimes when that's written down, then you realize, oh no, wait, that's not really what I meant, or so that tends to work very well. Also, with we communicate on Slack very often. Mostly that's how we communicate, and in writing it works well. But it's true that sometimes, when you feel like the conversation is going back and forth, then knowing when to jump into a huddle or a quick call is also very effective. So we do rely a lot on written communication, but it's also important to know, okay, yeah, whenever it's going back and forth more than a certain length, then we just need to jump on a call and figure it out.
Right. Yeah. I think that those norms should be, decided upon with teams. Or it's like if there's more than 8 slacks back and forth, it's like a decision tree.
Mm-hmm.
If this, then this equals phone
Exactly.
call or meet or whatever you're using. One of the things, Paula, that you were talking about early on was this idea that of being yourself in a second language. I have felt a piece of that in particular, when I was living abroad and speaking primarily in Spanish. And yeah, this just maybe a piece of identity that is connected to language, and perhaps because my vocabulary and depth could only take me so far, there is almost this missing depth in the full Tracy who I see myself as when I'm speaking in my second language. Can you speak more to that? Is there like a term for this in psychology already that I don't know? Anything else about that?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've heard this before, but people tend to say that they have different personalities in different languages.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating. I think it happens to me as well, I guess. Like it happens to most people. And I think that is for a number of reasons. One is because you may not have the same tools. That could be it. So you cannot truly be yourself, or because you learned that second language in a different context. So if you learned, for example, Spanish in academia, then your vocabulary, your repertoire is going to be much more formal and academic. And if you learned French, I don't know, going out, then your vocabulary may be, you may use a lot of slang. So that is one way. Like one thing is the context where you learn that language. And then I think a third factor in here is how different communication styles are translated. So, for example, when I live now in Spain, um, I used to be, before moving here, I used to be perhaps like much more polite and indirect, and I was not considered indirect when I lived in the United States. It was just really standard. And then when I moved here, everyone started to say, "Oh, you're very polite, you're very diplomatic, you're very indirect." And what people think of you kind of like
Yeah.
make you become that. So I think that's also another factor. Like, how does your style translate into this new culture? So I don't know. For me, what really worked, so I saw this very clearly when I moved to Belgium. I had studied French for many years, and I thought I was perfectly fluent. And then when I got there, I didn't feel I was myself because I wasn't, I don't know, I wasn't able to make any witty comments, or it was not fast. And I don't know, like it didn't, like I didn't have the words to like find that. And so I figured out, oh, I actually use a lot of, for example, idioms
Yeah.
in English. Then perhaps what would help would be to start learning new idioms in French to see if then I feel much more myself.
Right. Oh, and that you just took me back to English class when we were learning idioms, and like we had to draw some of them, and so we were like drawing raining cats and dogs, and there's some really bizarre ones, and they're bizarre like in all sorts of different languages, right? And so understanding that's such a interesting concept, and it's really sticking with me of okay, learn recognizing I hear first the self-awareness of what is making me feel that I'm not feeling myself in comparison to my native language. Okay, it's these idioms. So, but I don't have to stay there. I can learn that. I think it's one of the things that draws me to be obsessed with learning, and why I love getting to do the work that I do with my clients, because my mission statement is unleashing human potential through learning experiences that are full of joy, rooted in research, and experienced in community. And that unleashing human potential is so remarkable to me in even learning another language, first of all, to be able to communicate with a whole entire other group of people, and the creativity that comes with that. Sometimes when I can't think of a word in English, I think of the word in Spanish first. It takes me to something else, like to just give me different vocabulary, and or think about the roots of concepts. If I'm trying to explore, something like communication, I'll go back to that word in Spanish and then see kind of where that takes me, right? I think that it's just really sticking with me that that's really powerful too. I don't think I'd thought about the intersection of identity and like who we are, who we see ourselves as, and language, really in such a deep way before. So thank you for that.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. It's fascinating when we get, for example, we get professionals from around the world, and we get these very super capable professionals that are, very high level and super like diverse roles in the workplace. And for example, in high tech, we work a lot with the tech industry, and you see how when they speak their own language, they are these people that everyone wants to listen to, and they have so much knowledge to share. And then they feel like, but when I speak in English, it's like going back to when I was a teenager where I couldn't express myself. And that's the part that is, you know, it doesn't let them, advance in their career. So and it's because they don't feel themselves. They don't have the tools to be themselves and to share all that knowledge that they do have. So,
It's also making me think about, I did some work on a course for a client around psychological safety. And so we went deep into psychological safety for a client that was in the innovation space. And we were talking about how vital it is when you think about psychological safety, how vital it is to have that in place to get to innovation. Like, it's one thing to feel included, that's kind of where things start, and then it's one thing to feel like you can learn and make mistakes, but then all the way up that, there's a Timothy Clark that has the psychological safety arrow that I'm referencing in my mind, and at the very top is innovation. And I think about all of these multicultural companies and the global nature of innovation and technology and where we're headed with just the way technology continues to evolve so quickly and at this point so exponentially fast, and how vital it is to have that sense of safety. And so what I'm getting at here is I'm thinking about how people need to feel safe as they are speaking in order to get to that innovation. And so again, in recognizing, it sounds like in the work that y'all do at Talaera, getting at some of the heart of that so that they can freely speak and hit that potential that they know they have to share and to innovate and to grow. I don't know if any of that resonates, or also if you want to speak to anything else within Talaera about how y'all approach the types of things maybe that y'all offer around that.
yeah, so we had this brings me back to a conversation we had Heather Hansen on Talaera Talks, and she talks about linguistic bias. And yes, we do help non-native English professionals communicate effectively in the workplace, but if we look at the bigger picture, there is a lot that everyone else can do, also native English speakers, by making it easy. We've also, like, I've heard this many times, like, I'm okay having a virtual meeting with other non-native English speakers, but whenever there's someone from the UK or the US and they start using all these, like, complicated words and a lot of phrasal verbs and idiomatic expressions, and then I just don't understand. So also taking that responsibility as native English speakers to make it a bit easier for everyone to be part of the conversation. I think that's already like a great step as organizations, become more and more global. And then yeah, psychological safety is massive, but I think that is everyone's responsibility, starting from the top, from leadership, and then really conveying that and being okay not being perfect, because we go back to, like, we are perfectionists when it comes to speaking a language, but accepting that is, it's not realistic for most people, because they just have, they may not have had the time or the resources or
Right.
access to that kind of training.
Yeah. Yeah, it's making me think about just like the part of our brain that is trying to just stay safe is limiting us from the full abundance that's possible in those conversations. And so earlier we talked about the responsibility of ourselves in the conversation to make sure we understand. And then now I hear you talking about the responsibility of, if you are in the native speaker group, making sure that it is accessible for the non-native speaker group through, it sounds like one of the things you spoke to was intentionality of our speech, and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about what is, it's probably good for us anyway to have clear, straightforward speech instead of complicated jargon for everyone. And it aligns to me, it just made me think about the concept of universal design for learning is when we design for those in the margins in mind, it works better for everyone. And so I hear
Yeah.
that here. It's no deterrent to anyone. It's helpful for all. And I see a lot of hope in this direction. I think I'm maybe a idealist by nature. Being in learning, I see, oh, there's so much potential. We can learn, we can do better, and I understand how the brain works. And like, we can, this conversation is changing our brains. Like, that is remarkable. Meeting a new person, having a new perspective. And so I have a lot of hope in this area. But maybe what are you seeing in terms of the work that you do? Are you seeing more people come to this understanding of recognizing the need for this work, the need for what you just spoke to in particular, making communication accessible so that everybody can thrive? Anything around that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reports I've seen, especially this year. There's one by Grammarly. They did a fantastic job with the state of business communication, and it really reflects the cost of poor communication in the workplace. It really is expensive. Like, it really is very expensive. They found that it was about 7 hours are wasted per employee due to poor communication, and this is across the board, not only non-native English speakers. It's really also including native English speakers. So organizations are realizing more and more that there is a need. And when we started working with different countries in Europe and the Middle East, the they knew when we started back a few years ago, they knew that there was a need. But now that everyone's working remotely, and then there's no barriers, like someone in Germany is working with a team in India, and that is much more visible now after the pandemic, since we're all working remotely. So we do see a lot of people now really being aware of the importance of making communication more accessible to everyone in the workplace. And it truly is, it's not a fuzzy thing anymore. It's not a nice to have anymore. It truly is a must. Like, your teams cannot thrive if they cannot communicate with each other effectively. So yeah, we've started to see that. And also, it's interesting because in the US, the companies that the organizations that we work with in the US, they're starting to see also the cultural component much more than in many other places. So they do appreciate, oh yeah, we have teams from anywhere, from India, and their English is great. Their vocabulary is better than mine. But then there's something that is not working. Why is that? And so there's this cultural component.
So one of the things that I understand that you all do at Talaera is host workshops and webinars, and as you're supporting folks within these communication skills in English. And so will you speak to your upcoming webinar about working across cultures? And I'll make sure I include that in the episode description.
Yes, so coming up in May the 10th, we're hosting a webinar. It's a free webinar, so we do have a lot of different types of training, and that is one-on-one sessions with an instructor, or group courses, company webinars. But these ones, once a month, we host a free webinar just to truly make it accessible to everyone. And we're talking about, it's called Working Across Cultures. We hosted this last year. It was a massive success, and we try to make it interactive. Everyone's invited. We'll talk about how to effectively communicate with teams from other cultures. We'll see how to navigate that difference between indirect and direct communication. We'll see, even with scheduling, we don't perceive time the same way. Like, for some people, it's more linear. And if you're late, then you're late. And for others, it's much more flexible. Being late doesn't truly mean that you're late. Like, we perceive the world differently. So we'll talk about a lot of things related to that, and we'll give a lot of tips as well. So yeah, everyone's much more than welcome to join.
And with this idea of there being exponential power in us and the potential, thank you for sharing with us your journey, what's brought you to Talaera and doing the incredible work that you're doing. What is something that you're currently working on or learning yourself to continue to grow?
Yeah, so I'm super passionate about, user learner experience. I know that's what you do, so perhaps we can have a chat later where I can learn from you. I'm fascinated by that. So when you're a trainer, when you're a facilitator, I think it's so easy because you have that knowledge in your head, right? And you just want to transfer that knowledge, and it's kind of easy to forget about the experience. And I'm a big believer that if you don't enjoy the learning process, then it's just not going to stick. It's not going to happen. It can happen if it's something like this kind of mandatory training where you just have to do it and you just need to mark that checkbox. But if it's true, meaningful learning, I truly believe that there needs to be an emotional connection, and it needs to be a journey where, you know, that means something to you. So that's something that I'm learning more about.
Yes, I'd love to always talk about those things. One of the concepts that stuck with me from the education world is the idea that sometimes teachers will say, "Oh, I covered the content." Right? I covered the content, meaning like I spoke the content to the tiny humans, in this case in K-12, or medium-sized humans. But then the other part of the question is, did anybody learn? Did they learn the content? That's the question that leads us to kind of zoom in on the learning experience, and both the efficacy of it and the enjoyment, understanding how our brains work, and understanding the abundant joy of learning that is in the potential of it, and playing to learn. Those are some areas that I think are really interesting. Sometimes we put play and games as this fuzzy fluffy thing, when they're so powerful and they're so impactful. And I think people are coming around to some of that with things like Lego serious play. But see, they had to put the term serious in with Lego. They couldn't have just said Lego play and then corporate, America says we'll buy that. But if they put serious in with it, now it's sellable as a consulting service. I'm always really fascinated by that intersection of joy and play and rigorous, meaningful learning. Paola, we love to ask any book recommendations. What would you leave us with on that front? Any podcast recommendations? Share with us what brings you joy and knowledge there.
So there's one, talking about culture before, there's one book that I love and I always recommend, and that is The Culture Map by Erin Mayer. She did a fantastic job at, reflecting how different cultures collaborate. I think it's a must if you work across cultures. Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, is a great book on, how to change a habit for yourself and also on your team. So if you lead a team, there's a lot of great, there's a lot of great insights in there. Nudge is another book that I find super interesting, also for instructional design as well, and also marketing. I work in marketing, so there's a lot of different nuggets, golden nuggets that you can grab. In terms of podcasts, Nudge by Phil Agnew, he does a fantastic job. It's about marketing, but there's a lot of behavioral science behind it. Super interesting. Also for anyone in L&D as well, I think would find it fascinating. And then Talaera Talks. That's the one I co-host, and we talk about communication, cross-cultural communication, and all things related.
I'm doing some work around this idea of learning habits. And so I'm curious, within your work and the clients that you've worked with, if you have any synthesized concepts around that you've seen in what does it take to develop a learning habit. Maybe we'll just say when it comes to language.
Ooh, that could be another episode. I think one basic tip that I always give to our learners is make it part of your day. Don't expect that it will happen unexpectedly, that you're not going to wake up. It's the same as working out. You're not going to wake up one day and say, oh, today I feel like learning German, or today I feel like working out. It may happen, but it doesn't really work that way. So look at your calendar and think ahead, how, like, where does this fit? And it has to be something that is not forced. Has to be a moment that truly works for you. Sometimes if you're commuting to work and you have 45 minutes, make them count. And that could be by listening to for example, if you want to improve your language, listen to a podcast, or listen to something that allows you to repeat after. Like, make it truly part of your day and your habit. Having someone to do it with also helps a lot. I mean, we could talk about this for truly hours, but those are the two main tips that I think truly make a difference.
Thank you so much. Okay, where can people find you if they want to connect? Maybe speak to who is your ideal client there that might be looking for those services.
Yeah, so what we offer with Talaera is communications training, mostly for organizations. So if you have a team of non-native English speakers and you would like to give them that, empower them to communicate effectively in the workplace, talk to us. It's Talaera or Talaera.com. and we'll get back right away. So even if it's just a consultation, we really like to hear about the needs and see if there is a program that fits your needs, and then we custom make it for you. We hang out on LinkedIn lately a lot, so yeah, even myself. So Paola, we can drop the link later. So Paola Pascual or Talaera, that's where I'm behind. And then if you would like to chat about psychology, languages, communication, culture, marketing, people, then I'm more than happy to talk about it.
Wonderful. Paola, thank you so much for coming on. It was such a delight to connect, and I look forward to continuing to watch the amazing work that you're doing at Talaera and send people your way that have that particular need, and just continue to be a part of the L&D Shakers community. So thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.